DevOps and CI-CD Part 2. This episode has 13 questions. For each question, take a moment to think through your own answer before I share a strong approach. Question 1. Observability. Observability platform. How would you design observability for a platform team so developers get useful golden signals without creating noisy alerts? Here's a strong way to approach it. Provide a standard, auto-instrumented golden signals dashboard, latency, traffic, errors, saturation for every service by default via the golden path template, so developers get useful observability without manually setting it up. Keep alerting centered on slow burn rate and clear user impact thresholds rather than raw infrastructure metrics, and give teams self-service ability to add custom alerts for their own signals without needing the platform team to gatekeep every alerting rule. Nice. Let's continue. Question 2. Security or DevSecOps. Cloud Armor. Design a Cloud Armor and load balancing strategy for an internet-facing service. How would you handle WAF rules, rate limits, exceptions, and observability? Here's a strong way to approach it. Front the service with a global external HTTPS load balancer and Cloud Armor configured with the managed WAF rule set. OWASP-style protections plus rate limiting to blunt volumetric abuse. Starting new rules in preview or dry run mode to catch false positives before enforcing. Handle exceptions narrowly and with documented justification and review dates. And monitor Cloud Armor logs and metrics. Block request counts, rule hit rates, so you can tune rules based on real traffic patterns rather than guessing. Great. Moving on. Question 3. GKE or Kubernetes. Auto-scaling trade-offs. Explain HPA, VPA, and cluster autoscaler. When can they conflict, and how would you tune them for a production workload? Here's a strong way to approach it. HPA scales the number of pod replicas based on metrics, CPU, custom metrics. VPA adjusts individual pod resource requests or limits, and cluster autoscaler adds or removes nodes based on unschedulable pods or underutilized nodes. They operate at different layers but can conflict if HPA and VPA are both actively resizing or rescaling the same workload simultaneously, causing thrashing. Generally use HPA for stateless services that scale well horizontally. Avoid running HPA and VPA on CPU or memory simultaneously for the same workload. Use VPA in recommendation-only mode instead. And ensure cluster autoscaler's node pool limits are generous enough not to bottleneck HPA scaling decisions. Alright, next question. Question 4. Automation or platform. GitOps. How would you implement GitOps with Argo CD for Kubernetes workloads across dev, staging, and production while keeping rollbacks and approvals safe? Here's a strong way to approach it. Structure a Git repo, or app of apps pattern, with one Argo CD application per environment pointing to environment-specific overlays, customize or Helm values. So promotion from dev to production is a Git merge or PR rather than a separate deployment mechanism. Require PR approval for changes to production overlays. Use Argo CD's automated sync only for lower environments while keeping production sync manual or gated behind an approval. And rely on Git history for rollback. Reverting a commit and letting Argo CD reconcile is inherently safe and auditable. Let's keep going. Question 5. Terraform or IAC. Policy as code. How would you use Sentinel, OPA, or policy validation to stop risky GCP changes before apply while keeping developer experience smooth? Here's a strong way to approach it. Run policy checks against the Terraform plan JSON in CI before apply, evaluating rules like no public ingress on sensitive ports or all resources must have required labels, and fail the pipeline with a clear, specific error message pointing to exactly what needs to change. Keep the developer experience smooth by starting new policies in warn or audit mode before enforcing, and providing a fast, well-documented exception process for legitimate edge cases so policy doesn't become a blocker teams root around. On to the next one. Question 6. CI/CD or GitOps. DNS migration. How would you migrate DNS zones with minimal risk, and how would you plan TTLs, validation, rollback, and monitoring? Here's a strong way to approach it. Lower the TTL on records well before the migration window, so any rollback or correction propagates quickly. Validate the new DNS provider's records match exactly using a diff against the old zone, and cut over gradually if possible. Partial traffic shift, rather than all at once. Monitor resolution success and application error rates closely during and after cutover, and keep the old DNS provider or zone configuration intact and ready as an instant rollback option until the new setup has proven stable. Good. Here's another one. Question 7. Security or DevSecOps? Container runtime security. What runtime security controls would you consider for Kubernetes workloads beyond image scanning? Here's a strong way to approach it. Beyond scanning images before deployment, add runtime controls like seccomp or AppArmor profiles to restrict syscalls, a read-only root file system where possible, dropped Linux capabilities, not just non-root, and network policies limiting lateral movement if a container is compromised. Consider runtime threat detection, Falco or a similar tool, that alerts on anomalous in-container behavior, unexpected process execution, file access outside expected paths. Since image scanning only catches known vulnerabilities at build time, not runtime exploitation. Nice. Let's continue. Question 8. SRE or reliability. Incident postmortem quality. What makes a postmortem high quality, and how do you ensure action items actually get completed? Here's a strong way to approach it. A high-quality postmortem is blameless, includes an accurate timeline, digs into systemic root cause rather than stopping at the immediate trigger, and honestly assesses what went well and what didn't in the response itself, not just the technical failure. To ensure action items complete, assign a specific owner and due date to each one. Track them in the same system as regular engineering work, not a separate forgotten document, and review overdue postmortem action items in a recurring forum with visibility to leadership. Great. Moving on. Question 9. Observability. ML monitoring tools. How would you combine Vertex AI model monitoring, Prometheus, Grafana, MLflow, and evidently style checks in one production monitoring design? Here's a strong way to approach it. Use Vertex AI model monitoring for GCP native prediction drift and skew detection tied directly to deployed endpoints. Prometheus or Grafana for infrastructure and serving layer metrics, latency, throughput, resource utilization. MLflow for tracking experiment lineage and linking a production model back to its training run. And evidently style checks for deeper statistical drift or data quality analysis that you can run on a schedule against production data. Unify alerting so any of these systems can trigger the same incident response path rather than living in separate silos nobody checks consistently. Alright, next question. Question 10. Automation or platform? Platform roadmap. What would your first 90 days look like as a senior platform engineer joining a product company? Here's a strong way to approach it. The first 30 days focus on listening and mapping, understanding current pain points, talking to teams the platform serves, and auditing existing infrastructure and processes without changing anything yet. Days 30-60 involve picking one or two high-impact, achievable improvements, often something already identified as painful, to build credibility and trust through a visible early win. And days 60-90 shift toward a longer-term roadmap informed by what was learned, presented with clear priorities and trade-offs to stakeholders. Let's keep going. Question 11. Terraform or IAC? Drift detection. How would you detect and reconcile drift between Terraform state, real GCP resources, and manual console changes? Here's a strong way to approach it. Run scheduled Terraform plan jobs in CI against every workspace and alert when a non-empty diff appears, since that indicates drift between state and reality. Investigate whether the drift came from an unauthorized manual console change. Reconcile by applying Terraform to restore the intended state, or importing the change if it was legitimate versus a genuine out-of-band necessity. And restrict console write access for resources managed by Terraform to reduce how often this happens in the first place. On to the next one. Question 12. Automation or platform? Log automation. Can you automate log analysis or processing? Here's a strong way to approach it. Yes, use log-based metrics and alerting policies in cloud monitoring to automatically detect end-page on error patterns without manual review, And use scheduled queries or dataflow or cloud functions triggered by log syncs to automatically parse, aggregate, and summarize logs, e.g. a daily top errors report. For incident response specifically, automation can prefetch relevant recent logs and surface a summary the moment an alert fires, saving the responder from manually querying logs as a first step. Good. Here's another one. Question 13. GCP services, Cloud Functions and Cloud Run. Have you used Cloud Functions or Cloud Run? Explain use cases and operational considerations. Here's a strong way to approach it. Cloud Functions fits small, single-purpose, event-triggered code, a pub or sub-message triggering a lightweight transformation, where you want minimal operational overhead and don't need control over the runtime environment. Cloud Run fits containerized services needing more control, custom dependencies, longer running requests, multiple endpoints, while still being fully managed and serverless. Operational considerations for both include cold start latency for infrequent invocations, concurrency or scaling limits, and ensuring IAM permissions are scoped narrowly per function or service rather than broadly shared. Nice. Let's continue. That wraps up this episode. Nice work practicing, and see you in the next one.